It's exciting and always wonderful to be here as we are here with the Black Men and Boys Day. And so I just want to open us up in a word of prayer so that we stand on a strength that is not our own. Won't you join me in prayer? God, we're grateful for this day. We're grateful for your hand, but most of all, we're grateful for these brothers. And we're grateful, God, for this phenomenal legacy that we stand on in this moment. Thank you for what you did yesterday and how you taught us and how you informed us, how you empowered us. We're looking forward to another day, God, of brothers all over this nation, all over this world, being empowered to be their greatest them, to be able to have impact to transform this nation and the world. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen and amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. And so what we have in store for you today, like I said, is we're going to be breaking these out in very much of two different panels. Our moderator, I jokingly called him my cousin because my name is Joshua as well. Joshua Du Bois is not only an author of family friendly say of NCBCP, but as well as a CEO of Values Partnership. He brings experience of bringing partners together, not only from faith-based, but from nonprofit and public sector. He will be moderating a panel called Advocating Social Change for Black Men and Boys. And so, Joshua, thank you for moderating.
Thank you, Cousin Josh. I appreciate you, sir, and appreciate you, Daryl, and Melanie Campbell, Reverend Tony, and all of my NCBCP and Black Youth Vote and Black Women's Roundtable family. This organization is at the heart, and I mean the absolute heartbeat of the progress that we have made as a community and the strategies that we will need to implement to continue to make progress in the future. If you track back the civil rights advancements for our community, there is a good chance that Melanie Campbell and this amazing organization and the youth organizing through Black Youth Vote is a central part of that. So just grateful for all the work that folks have done, and really excited for what's in store, and excited for this conversation as well in this really important conference, this Black Men and Boys Virtual Hill Day and Advocacy Training. How can we train up one another to go out and fight for and lift up the voices of Black men and boys? We have a phenomenal panel that I'll introduce in just a moment. And what we're going to really get into is the state of Black men and boys in America. You know, that state is strong and it's complicated, it's precarious, it's maybe a little vulnerable, it's beautiful, sometimes it can be depressing, but ultimately I believe it is hopeful, and we're going to dig into that hope as well. And there's no one better than the folks that we have assembled this evening to get into that conversation. I'm excited to introduce to you all Brandon Cahey. Brandon is a senior program policy analyst and specialist focused on African American outreach and engagement for the National Education Association. We also have on the line Jared Sawyer Jr., who is the state coordinator for Black Youth Vote Georgia and the president and CEO of You Power Purpose Incorporated. I love that name, You Power Purpose. And so we're going to get into what are the challenges we're facing as Black men and boys, what are the solutions to those challenges, and how can we mobilize and advocate for Black men and boys. And Brandon, maybe I'll start with you. You are really focused every day on education. What is the landscape there? What are the biggest challenges facing Black men and boys in K through 12 education?
Sure, and thank you, Joshua, for that warm introduction. So first, I would say access to an education where students can feel safe coming to school. Because as we all know, for those that are in this convening, that education is a civil right. Yet it's a right that has to be fought for each and every day to ensure students have the tools they need to succeed. We need to be able to challenge systemic racist policies and practices openly and honestly, that have for far too long impacted our educational system, and quite frankly, many other institutionalized systems throughout this country. We need to address this issue head on so that students can learn successfully instead of fearing criminalization in schools. Our Black and Brown students are being systemically pushed out of the classroom, and this is even more exacerbated since the COVID-19 pandemic. Second, I would say students, and specifically students of color, need to see themselves, their culture, and their heritage depicted in what materials they are being taught in the classroom. It is important that Black students, especially those that are here, have an education that imparts honesty about who they are integrity, and how to treat others, and also the courage to know what is right and what's wrong. There are lots of restrictive laws that have been introduced into legislations all across this country which directly go against this. And this takes away from the opportunity for students to learn about the whole history of America. You deserve the freedom to learn. You deserve the freedom to develop the knowledge and skills to reckon with our past to shape a better future and pursue your dreams. And last, I would say that, excuse me, that we need to be able to utilize our collective voice in order to move to collective action. Our Black educators and specifically student voices matter and are integral to understanding decisions that impact us in our schools and communities. So when we were able to come together to ensure racial justice, especially in education, it strengthens the whole community. Thank you.
Phenomenal, Brendan. Thank you so much. We need to ensure safety and security and beware of the criminalization of Black men and boys. It's hard to say safety without thinking about school shootings or the insecure environments that so many Black boys walk into every single day, even when there's not a school shooting. We also need to be thoughtful about the curriculum, particularly over the last year where we've seen this insane backlash to quote unquote critical race theory, which is really preventing students around the country, both Black boys and others, from learning their history. And then finally, bringing together our collective voice. I hope y'all are taking notes. I certainly am. That was a comprehensive picture of where we are when it comes to education. Jared, over to you. And speaking of those laws that Brandon talked about that were passed, a lot of this traces back to voting, right? I'd love to hear from you about how ballot access or lack thereof impacts Black men. Would you mind speaking to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Without ballot access, we feel burdened already as is. Black men are already dealing with a lot as is. Black men face high discrimination. We face depression, even as our education rises, even as our income rises. Young Black men are facing this on the daily, where they can see their lives transitioning into something that looks like stability on one end, but on the other end, it still can feel as though they can't seem to come up off of their off of where they used to come from. Black men are still disappropriately shot and killed by police more than Black women. Black men are still stopped and arrested, jailed more, significantly overrepresented in U.S. prisons. Black men are still 6 or 7 times more likely than white men to spend time in prison. We're dealing with, just as my brother Brandon just mentioned, mass incarceration on a whole nother level. And so, Black men are being singled out. And so when we talk about the state of Black men and boys in America, it's complicated. And I think that's the big conclusive statement, that if we came to Black men, young and older, seasoned and just getting to feel what it means to be a Black man, it's complicated. It can be so much. It's ultimately, though, hopeful. Where we are now, we're still very hopeful. And at the base of that is voter access. At the base of that is the ballot access. At the base of that is making sure that we help our fellow young Black brothers understand that there's one thing to focus on: the right to vote, that fundamental principle of our democracy. And it's a whole nother thing to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to have our brothers back. I went to Morehouse, and so brotherhood was a huge piece of everything. And it was, I got my back. Absolutely. And it was one of those things where
how are you?
It was one of those things where, I think that it's important now that we
look. I hit you earlier. I was trying.
And hey, Reverend Cody, you may need to mute your line. I just want to make sure we're not getting on your conversation. There we go, Jared. Go back over to you.
And so it's one of those things where I think that now we definitely have to lift each other up to help each other to gain that same belief, or really to focus on that access and to gain that same hope that hopefully each other can have. So yeah, voter access is huge. It's at the tier of it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brother Jared. Well said, and certainly agree. Now, Brandon, we are, of course, in a virtual advocacy training. So the idea here is that the information that we're talking about today, we're going to bring that in front of legislators. We're going to either virtually or hopefully when it's safe in person, bring this in front of, our members of Congress or state and local officials. When we do that, what are some of the policies we should be talking about? What should we be advocating for right now? What's on the agenda that we should be pushing?
Sure, no problem. And the way I'll frame it is in regards to some of the solutions to the issues I uplifted earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So first, in order to ensure students can learn.
So they won't be surprised.
You're all good now. Go ahead.
In order to ensure students can learn successfully, instead of being criminalized in classrooms, we need to ensure that schools transform policing policies for us to ensure and provide safe and just communities. This inherently includes ending the school to prison pipeline deportation system, as we all know about, where students of color, disproportionately Black students, are criminalized for minor infractions in schools, which leads them to being disconnected, feeling disconnected in the classroom and being pushed out. And this must change. That is why we at the NEA are demanding justice for Black lives as a core function of our work as we are moving forward for racial justice in education, in which transforming policing policies for safe and just schools is a tenet. So I think that's one way and one solution that we can advocate in our classrooms. We must demand that decision makers, as Joshua just mentioned, really take a look at and re-examine the role of law enforcement in our schools to ensure public safety, while dismantling unjust policies that are designed to disproportionately impact Black and Brown people. So I think that's something that we should do. Second, in order to fight back against the attacks, as we mentioned about honesty in education, the critical race theory, we need to look at the attacks that are happening that are preventing students to be taught the truth. We need to advocate for funding to be fully and equitably provided to public schools so that every child can get accurate and honest education, providing them with the critical thinking skills and the freedom to pursue their dreams. So that's another solution. This can be done by engaging in school board meetings that are happening in your locals and your states, contacting your elected leaders about pushing this agenda forward, and voting, as my brother Jared just said, for equitable funding so that every child can have a quality education. This is why the NEA remains committed to working with our community partners on this very issue to fight and ensure for justice for Black lives in our schools and our communities. Because as the men that are on this call, your voice matters, you matter, and your future matters. And then last, in regards to really galvanizing and using our collective voice, we need to work together to speak up and speak out on issues that you see in your schools and your communities. Use these valuable tools that have been taught to you over the course of these 2 days in this advocacy training to be able to go back in your schools and communities to make collective actions and collective change. Work with your administrators and your educators to host listening sessions in your schools and convenings where they can actually be able to hear open and honestly about the issues that impact you on an everyday. Also, see what other resources that you can provide to your schools and in your communities, and also at these school board meetings to be a resource to them to provide you the best opportunity to be successful in your future endeavors. And that's it.
That is phenomenal, Brandon. Thank you for that roadmap. We appreciate you and grateful for another panelist having joined us. Vincent Sylvain, convener of the Louisiana Unity Coalition, doing tremendous work there in New Orleans, and so appreciate you and all that you do. We're talking about, first we started with some of the biggest challenges facing Black men and boys, and then we are moving into now solutions. And so, Brother Jared, when it comes to solutions and specifically what we should be advocating for on the as we think about voting, what should we be fighting for right now? What should we be raising with our legislators? What should we be fighting for?
Well, I'm going to go big and then I'm going to go small. On the big level, honestly, reparations. I believe that the top policy area is reparations, because the racial gaps are just so large. They're present in wealth, they're present in income, housing value, when it comes to educational attainment, when it comes to health status, when it comes to our rates of incarceration, when it comes to our employment. There's just a clear sign that it's a result of deep racism within the United States, and it's all stemming from the act of slavery. And so reparations can be used to correct this injustice. I think that we do have to start having conversations around what reparations looks like. I think that perhaps what it looked like 20 years ago, or even maybe 5 years ago, is not the same as what it will look like today. It may not look like giving out checks to all Black men, or a large constituency of Black men in this country. It may look like taking a look at the specific impacts in areas like health status and employment, even taking a look at this pandemic and how Black men and Black women are disproportionately affected by COVID-19, both on a health level as well as certain things like housing and employment, et cetera. In the past 2 years, we've seen this. And so I think that whereas we have seen a momentum on some national level reparation policies, it's very important that we begin to take a look to fight for an effective plan that focuses on how they're issued, how they're financed, at what level are they explored. But I do believe that number one, reparations is a huge, a very important piece in how we deal with our issues as Black men in America. Number two, I believe that we have to fight for improving the criminal justice system, criminal justice reform. We have to begin to really address the social issues, the problems that are affecting Black boys and men. And that's why I love this panel, this conference, because it's not just about Black men, but it's about Black boys as well. There has to be significant reform that we're fighting for as we're going out on the ballot. We're drastically overrepresented in the prison population. We're accounting for 35% of the prison population, but only 6% of the US population. We're 5 times more likely to be incarcerated during our lifetime than white men. This reality has effects on the life chances of Black men. So we face these barriers in finding employment and in housing, and many people are losing the right to vote, and they're losing their access to social services such as federal student aid if they ever are trying to go back to school. And all this taken together just reduces our economic opportunities that are available to us as Black men, and it hinders our role in our social life, and it hinders our role in our family life. And so I believe that to address these obstacles, number two, we have to focus on criminal justice reform. And then I would say number three, we have to focus on mentorship programs and mentorship ability. Mentorship programs, I think, are very important. And I do believe that the federal government and state governments have to fund this. I believe they have to fund it now. Providing young Black boys with access to a Black male role model that can help to benefit young Black men in academic performance, in their social well-being, in their emotional well-being, in preventing risky behaviors that we see to be very common. I think that this can happen through public policy, a greater investment into such. But most importantly, Black boys have to be able to see and touch successful Black men. They have to be able to connect to Black men that they look up to and that they see are durable. They see they've been through the trials, through the turmoil, and that they've made it. And so I think that we have to push for the federal government, state government, local government to sponsor Black boys into opportunities, sponsor Black boys into jobs, sponsor Black boys into businesses, sponsor Black boys into equity. It's I guess in one sense connected with reparations, but I do think that it's separate. But we have to make that decision to fight for that in order to make a real impactful difference in their lives.
Amen, indeed. And it's so funny, you know, the mentoring connects back to voting, right? Because those that we put in office are the ones that can free up resources to support mentoring programs, which ultimately enables the types of connections that you're talking about, where a Black boy can touch and feel and be inspired by a Black male role model, and then that goes on to shape the contours of their own life. It goes back to advocacy, y'all. We have to go in and say that when we're thinking about the federal budget, yes, roads and bridges are a priority. Yes, lots of other pieces are a priority, but it's also a priority to invest in these types of programs that support our community. Brother Sylvain, it's such an honor to have you on the line. Would love to know more about your work in Louisiana, what you're seeing from an electoral and ballot access landscape, what the threats are that are confronting folks who are trying to operationalize their right to vote. What is the voting landscape right now in Louisiana, and what are you seeing across the country as well?
I want to address, thank you for having me, first of all.
Yeah.
I think Jared made some key points, and all of you have, in terms of systems and the problem with the system that affects the Black community, in particular the Black male community. And he touched upon, I think, one area that I like to begin with. I think what we really need to advocate is self-worth, self-belief, knowing that we are of value. And I think we have to begin stressing that educational achievement is just as good as athletic achievement. Educational achievement is just as good as entertainment achievement. And we struggle with that as a community. I did as a young fellow coming up myself, in so much as I would deny that I was making all A's, grade-wise. Now I don't know who I was fooling, because everybody in my class, all the fellas, but I always trying to copy off my paper, so they knew what I was doing. But I guess I was fooling just me. But when I went into the teaching profession, had a young fellow in my class, and he showed me his grades. And he says, and it was all B's. And he said, Prof, I could make all A's if I want. I said, well, why don't you? He said, man, you know why? I said, what? Man, they're gonna say I ain't right. So I told him, and I understood his position. I said, I understood, I went through that. I said, in fact, I talked about it when I gave my valedictorian speech. And he looked at me. His sister was a classmate of mine. And he's 10 years behind me, 10, maybe 12 years. He said, but he was on a football team. Sister was a cheerleader. And you play baseball. He said, Prof, I'm making all A's from now. And that's what he did. He made all A's. He went on to Grambling, played football at Grambling as a walk-on. Wound up with a starting role. He's actually a minister today.
Wow.
And I give that example of an example that there's probably hundreds and thousands of those type of examples in our community where we haven't stressed the importance of education. We don't place a value on it. Therefore, when they grow up, that's not important. And by the time many of them realized it, in this case, this guy was intelligent. He was doing well. He made all A's afterward. Didn't have to make all A's, but he did. But oftentimes it's too late. You're 30, you're 40, you realize I should have done better a little bit younger. And I think we can help improve our community as a whole if we start to stress that value. The other thing I think we need to push on responsibility. We father these kids and we think we buy a box of Pamper, a case of milk every month or two. We've done our duty. I've gone, oh man, I take care of mine. And I had to tell one guy, I'm saying, wait a minute, man, I'm helping to pay my sister's, your child's tuition. What you're doing is not enough. That's not manhood. That's not being a man. So it gets back to self-work. I think we have to go ahead and set those examples. Joshua Jared rather spoke a little earlier about mentoring, and that's where mentoring come in. But mentoring comes in all form and fashion, not just a formalized program, but is in the acts that we do.
Yeah, no, it's it's such a powerful point, brother. And the thing about it is it's both presence, yes, financially, but also just presence in their lives. One of the things I have 3 little ones, and it's just important for me to get down to their level. They're 6, 4, and 2, and look them in the eyes, and they know that I see them and that they see me, and that no matter what comes in life, I'm going to be with them. A dear friend's father has a mantra that he says to her. They're from South Carolina, and it's a little thing they say in their little town. You my horse, win, lose, or draw, you always going to be my horse. And just the sense that I'm going to be present for you no matter what. And like you said, mentoring comes in lots of different forms. I don't want to put him on the spot, but our dear friend, Reverend Tony Lee, is going to be moderating the next panel. But it's one of the cool things I see with Reverend Tony over at Community Hope is almost pastoral mentoring, how he pulls young brothers to the side and walks alongside them. Tony, I'd love to just pull you into this real quick if somehow we can get you live here. But as you're listening to this, what are you reflecting on in terms of the relationships you have with men and boys in the community, how you've walked alongside and supported them? What do our Black boys need right now?
So I think there are a couple of things, and Joshua, thank you so much, man, for all that you do, because you have been instrumental, you and your wife, instrumental in helping folks to find political power. And I think that is significant, that we have to help folks to understand. I shared a little bit of this yesterday, how what happens in the White House impacts every area of their life. What happens in the State House impacts every area of life. What happens in the county council and the city government impacts what happens in their house. It impacts what happens in the neighborhood and their community. It impacts decisions that are made around how folks get arrested and how they get charged and what are those kinds of things. So one, I think that we have to help folks to really have a clear understanding of the impact that policy has on everyday living, on how much food costs, on the kind of food they have access to, on the kind of health care they, one, have or don't have, but two, about even if they have access to health care in their own community, or if they have to go 20 miles to actually go to a doctor's visit, kind of a piece. That we got folks living in food deserts, mental health care deserts, regular health care deserts. I mean, it's like we living just in deserts on top of deserts. And so I think that what opportunity deserts, job deserts, economic deserts. And so I believe that when we're looking at Black men and boys in the communities I'm in, that we're looking at folks who actually want opportunity, but are looking and see that one, the chips have been stacked against them. And we understand that. We've been dealing with that from our time here. But we need to be showing folks how to turn their pain into power. And showing folks that they really have more power than they think they have. They really have more power than they think they have. And a lot of times that we equate, especially in the DC region, but nationally, we equate access with power, that you have to have access to have power. But the reality is they got access to a voting booth, and so they have some power. That's right. Especially when organized correctly, that when they understand that many of the elections in their area of many very influential folks who have direct impact on their lives, that those are many of those, whether it's judges, states attorneys, many of those kinds of elections end up being won by the hundreds, not the tens of thousands. And so if we understand those margins, then we
Sometimes by the
understand that if we
tens.
organize us, right?
Yeah.
Right. If we organize us, then we can swing all kinds of stuff. And that's nothing new. Malcolm talked about it with the ballot
Yep.
and the bullet. You know what I'm saying? That's
Yep.
nothing new, but it is something that it will be helpful for us. And so for me, I really think that it's helping brothers to be able to understand the power they have, not that they don't have power, not that they're powerless, not that they're marginalized, but that even where they are, with the stacks set up against them, they've got more power than they think they have. And when they walk in that power, they can transform communities.
Wow. Turn your pain into power. We do have a lot of pain, but that means we have a whole lot of power, right? And when it comes to votings, you said decided by tens of thousands, and Brother Vincent jumped in and said, well, actually it's tens in some cases. Just a handful of folks are deciding this, and we can, in fact, leverage that power, paying into power. I think about my own story. I don't talk about it too much, but my mom was a single parent for a while before she met my stepdad. We came through a lot of tough times. I remember I was born in the early 80s. She had an old Volkswagen Beetle from the 70s. So, it was an old car. And I would look down on the way to school, or sometimes we had to go to a shelter and other places. And there was a hole in the floor. I didn't know we were broke because my mom said that was a reverse sunroof. She said that was just a cool thing where I could see everything underneath the car. And so I didn't know that the hole in the floor of the car was a problem. And so she was able to shield and keep me from that. But skip, a couple decades later, and I have the blessing and honor, and just because of God, of being able to work for the first Black president in the White House. And so paying into power, and that is not just unique to me, that I meet brothers every single week at my barbershop on 8th Street, Northeast in DC, or, across the street from where I used to live, close to Anacostia High School, and all around this community that have so much brilliance and power, but all they see is the pain. But if we can tap into that pain and channel it, man, we can absolutely change the world. Our time is wrapping up. I just want to ask one more question to all of the panelists, and that's this wasn't on the script, but just that's about COVID-19. How has this last couple of years impacted maybe you personally? How do you think it's impacted brothers? I know for me, this has been a time more in the last year than ever before where I've had to confront and come to grips with my own mortality, right? And thinking about, those deeper subjects. I'm cognizant that, and this is crazy, but life expectancy for Black men, because of how this pandemic has decimated us, and I don't even think people are talking about it enough, has dropped by 2 years for Black men overall, which is insane. But just what has this last couple of years been like for you? How do you think it's impacted Black men, and just kind of any implications that you see? Anybody want to jump in on that?
I'm going through a situation. I lost a cousin yesterday to COVID.
Sorry, brother.
And he has two of his brothers. They also have, and they're hospitalized. 2 of the 3, only one was vaccinated. The other 2 refused. And those were some healthy, strong, men of steel brothers. I hope the second brother is gonna make it through it, and a wife. We as a community, I think oftentimes we think we've gotten through it. New Orleans, for instance, have done a remarkable job in terms of turnaround, in terms of number. My home community, where those 2 brothers live currently, we were number 1 in the country in terms of worse rate.
Wow.
Through some, I think, good political leadership, guidance, community leadership, faith-based leadership, we were able to turn that around. Now, New Orleans, the New Orleans region, New Orleans area, not Louisiana, but New Orleans area has one of the highest vax rate in the nation. So we went from worst to first, and that's a good thing. But as a community, we still constantly, we're losing people. I'm up to 30 people that I've lost that I know personally. Wow. I'm not talking about just associate, but close friends, close associate. And that's a tough situation. I remember the first brother we lost. I had saw him 2 days, and then the next day he was gone.
Mm.
At the time, I had no idea what it was. Just thought he had, the doctors didn't know what it was. Did he have a heart attack? Was it a stroke? They didn't know what it was. But yeah, it has affected the community. I think it continued to affect the community. It also affects the mind.
Yeah.
Stress that we are under. And oftentimes we don't realize why we're feeling not just right. We're not physically ill, but we're under stress. The nervousness, the unsureness, and we've lost some good people.
Yeah, yeah. No, you're 100% right, and certainly praying for you and your family, brother. And you're right. It's the buildup. Psychologists call it toxic stress, right? And if you have enough of that in your body, it's like somebody returning from war after fighting in Afghanistan. I mean, literally, they've studied this. It's a very big deal, and part of that is we need to be more intentional about finding places and people to talk about our stuff, right? If you have that, great. If you don't, be intentional about finding it. I'm a big believer in therapy and counseling, or even in the therapy of connecting with another brother and asking, how are you doing today? You know what I'm saying? Are you good? And if they say, yeah, I'm all right. No, tell me how you really are, right? And so really to going deep with one another, being vulnerable, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it can physically save a life, because as Brother Vincent is talking about, so this stuff gets bottled up, and that's where the heart attacks come from. That's where the stroke comes from, and that really impacts us in lots of different ways. And also, that's where a lot of the behaviors that manifest that we may not like or appreciate sometimes, that's where that comes from as well. We're exploding in different places because we don't have a space to process our own stuff. And so I think COVID has made that clear and bare, and it's been devastating. But the hopeful part of that, based on what Brother Vincent is saying, is that now we know it's on the table. Mental health is on the table. Our physical health is on the table. So we can deal with this stuff now that it's on the table. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on the pandemic or COVID or anything related to that.
Yeah, I'd like to comment because I absolutely agree with what Brother Vincent just said. I think that for everyone, it was so different. I can't personally say that I lost anyone that I knew, but what I do believe and I do know is that for me, this was definitely a season of awareness. And as I talk to various Black men, I speak to them and they say, this for them is a season of awareness where they begin to challenge what they've known to be reality and to accept what is to be what is really real. And the quote that comes to my mind is by Martin Luther King, where he said, in a real sense, all life is so interrelated. All men are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly, and that I can't be all what I ought be until you ought be what you ought be, and you can never be what you ought be until I am what I ought be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. And I think that young Black men have found themselves in a place where they say, oh, wow, what I thought to be real is not actually real. What I thought to be important is not really important. What I thought to be acceptable is not really acceptable. I must challenge what I face to be reality and what I accept to be reality, and try to find that merge, that connect between the two. And so I think that I know personally on my end, it's definitely been a matter of awareness. And I know as I speak to young Black men, it's the same. This has definitely been a season of awareness.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Brother Jay. Reverend Lee.
Yeah, so I think in some ways, the pandemic exposed our vulnerabilities, and we're folks were vulnerable. So, say I'm in Prince George's County, Maryland, supposedly the most affluent Black county in the nation. But what we saw was that we saw how extensive food insecurity was. So as a church where we used to probably give out groceries once or twice a month to 200-300 people, that we at one point during the pandemic were giving out groceries or hot meals 4 times a week. Since the pandemic has started, we've given out over 350,000 boxes of groceries, and that need bubbled up at such a high level that the need was just incredible. watching just what the need was. But I also think that it showed us our strengths as well. So it showed us areas of vulnerability, but it showed us our strengths. And so we saw community rallying around and coming together. One of the blessings for us as a church is that initially we were trying to feed everybody off of our budget, but it was just too many people off our budget. But we started watching and people started giving like we just had never seen before.
Wow.
And businesses started giving, and then the county came in and started giving. And so then where we didn't have enough and we were, just trying to do it off of what we had more than enough to be able to meet the need. And so that was the piece. I think the other piece, though, is that it has exposed the need to see who is caring for caregivers.
Yeah.
So for our first responders, so for those who are doctors and nurses, et cetera, but even for myself as a pastor, I realized at one point during the pandemic, we were about a year in, and I realized that the only time I left the house was either to take care of my parents who were in their 80s, or to give out groceries, or to bury people. And that kind of a load I realized was grinding. And so the mental health kind of a side of it was extremely important, because you're watching people who were doing everything they could to make sure that those who are vulnerable were taken care of. But we had to make sure at parts along the journey we were taken care of as well. And so I think that's important, especially in the activist community, because we didn't just deal with pandemic. We were also dealing with the politics of the previous administration, and we were also dealing with protests. And so you had us protesting, trying to fight for rights, trying to navigate electoral stuff, and dealing with a global pandemic all at the same time. And what I've seen is that many people who are in the movement, who are working so hard in activism, are just burnt out, who are just, and if they're not really seeing about and taking care of their mental health stuff, then it's playing out in physical disease, mental health disease, and just it's playing out in relationship disease and issues in relationships. So there's a need. I think that the pandemic brought a lot of that to the front.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you so much, Reverend. These are tough things, but I'm glad that they are on the table. And when they're on the table, we can deal with them. And thank you for calling out caregivers. We just pray even now for restoration for our caregivers, God, that you would come alongside the pastors and the first responders and the nurses and everyone who is caring for somebody else, and let them know that they are seen and that their needs matter, and build them up and give them a place where they can go beside some still waters and restore their soul. And this we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Sorry, I just believe in praying in the moment. If you mention it, let's just go ahead and lift it up. And so listen, y'all, this was awesome. And this is just a precursor, because I'm just a warm-up act for Reverend Tony Lee. I just want y'all to know that y'all about to have a phenomenal conversation in just a bit with some additional panelists. I do want to bring, we've had some heavy stuff, and so if you don't mind, just give me a little bit of moment of lightness. I'm gonna ask Reverend Lee to stay on. I need to bring Josh Gray on the line too. And just y'all, huge thank you to Brandon Cahey, to Jared Sawyer, to Vincent Sylvain. What a beautiful and thoughtful and probing conversation. And I'm excited to continue this conversation. This must not stop here. Black Youth Vote brought us together. Let's make sure Black Youth Vote keeps us together, and let's keep the conversation going in the future. So thank you to our panelists. Reverend Lee, stay on for just a second. Josh Gray, are you there?
I am on. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
There we go, y'all. We just have to, because Josh Gray, see, that's my cousin, messes with me a lot. He has a lot to say, but I just want to call out. But I don't respond in kind. I respond with support. And this brother, can we just comment on how fresh he is right now, y'all? Reverend Lee, what do you? I mean, am I off here? Is this?
This is live television, by the way. I want you.
I know. This is why we tried to.
Josh, hey, Josh, and I'm just saying, periodically he'll put his hand to his head so you can see the ring.
You can see.
I understand the play.
You can see the ring. You got the turtleneck.
The seasonal
appropriate.
Yeah,
the,
no,
the
we see
pinstripes match his last name, y'all. I mean, this is,
right.
he's hitting on every level right now. And so,
And the
yeah.
turtleneck even matches the whole little decor and the
The
pillows.
decor in the background, y'all need to understand that Josh Gray is bringing it this evening. And so we could not let this hour pass without calling that important fact.
Brother, so shall be
I
shite.
am so embarrassed, and this gives more
You just shouldn't
material.
be embarrassed. You should embrace it, brother.
This brings more material for
Reverend Lee, I'm going to pass it over to you and to our friends for the next panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Joshua.
Thank you so much, Josh. I really do appreciate it for just being a part of the Black Men and Boys. Josh was also a part of our planning committee, and I would say our Reverend, Reverend Tony Lee, who often before we went live, the only pastor Reverend I know who talks so much smack. At the same time, pray for you in 2 seconds. And so I appreciate him, the work he's done throughout this moment. And so what I'm going to do, though, is ask for those who are part of the next session to turn your cameras on. But for those who are just tuning in, I'd like to introduce you to my board chair, our board chair, and those would say their reverend. I guess I can, is it okay though, Pastor, I can say my reverend, even though I am Jewish, I just didn't understanding that, but say my reverend as well.
It is all good, Josh. It's all good.
Reverend Tony, who's the chair of the NCBC Black Male Initiative, as well as a board committee member, and then pastor of the community of Hope AME in Temple Hills, Maryland, and a Black Youth alumni, and he does everything. So really just appreciate you for the work you've done and you continue to do here with us and in the community. And so with that said, I will then hand it over to you.
Thanks a lot, Jocelyn. We really appreciate you. And once again, a salute for all your hard work in helping to pull this together. And shout out to Joshua Dubois, who just for the incredible job of moderating the past panel and all of those who shared in the past panel. I am excited for those panelists that we have that are going to be sharing in this next discussion. We've got some brilliant minds and some brilliant leaders who are going to be with us. One, we have Brother Dwayne Crawford, who's the executive director of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement of Noble. And it's always a pleasure to see my good brother, who, for all the hard work he does right here from the DC region, we have Brother Tony Lewis Jr., is author and activist. And I call him the mayor of the DMV, that he just holds it down. And he is an activist, and he is just an incredible brother. And then we have the political science chair of Virginia State University. Really appreciate this brother. He is just got off a plane and is in the car, and we just appreciate him taking his time. Brother Wes Bellamy, Dr. Bellamy, good to see you, brother. Bless you, man. We appreciate you being here with us as well today. And I'm just going to rock and roll and get in conversation, brothers, if y'all don't mind. I'm going to rock and roll and get in conversation. And one of the things I want to do is I really am hoping that you all will be able to share from your various positions, your various spaces, in ways that really can help enlighten and empower those who are listening in all the various ways they're listening. Now, I want to start, Brother Dwayne Crawford. Brother Dwayne, I want to ask you, and I want to thank you so much for being with us again. What is something in your space and your vantage point at Noble, what is something that is misunderstood when it comes to Black men in the criminal justice system? What is something that's misunderstood, or ways that we can leverage and empower Black men in the criminal justice system?
Yeah, well, I think one is we all have to own this. Whether it be me as an African-American man at 56 years old or a white female that's 56 years old. For example, when you take a look at our justice system, we notice disparities. I mean, that's a fact. Whether you look at those that are incarcerated, those that are being reincarcerated, right? We know those numbers, they skew negatively towards people of color, primarily African Americans. But I would just say this, we have in my opinion, a vested interest in all of our successes, right? We know historically, Black men, whether it be in professional jobs, in education, in housing, and economic development, or we're talking about right now, incarceration, we know that our men have been disproportionately affected. But we also know what? For this country to succeed, we need every one of our citizens, right, given a fair opportunity to succeed, meaning you can't win the competition on a global scale as America if you don't have all your citizens being educated, trained, and valued to ensure the success of the entire country. You know, you look at most other civilizations, they don't think in terms of 4-year political cycles. They think in terms of hundreds of years, thousands of years. The reason I bring this up is that we as a country have got to understand we need every citizen. I'll give you a quick story. Years ago, I did a speech down in Alabama, and I was there to speak to a number of educators. And as I'm sitting there, the governor gets up and he talks about the fact that he was excited that the state of Alabama had gone from being ranked 49th to being ranked 48th in education. And they wanted to celebrate that. So I'm sitting at the dais and I'm like, okay, Dwayne, say something polite, get back to your come back to Atlanta. Well, needless to say, I wasn't invited back to speak. What I talked about was you can't risk any of your citizens not being valued, educated, equally protected, receiving equal justice. And how about this one? And not being disproportionately incarcerated. You don't know who the next Obama is. You don't know who the next Einstein is. But if we don't start valuing all of our children and ensuring their success as a society and as a nation, we're not going to win.
So now, man, thank you so much for that. Dr. Bellamy, I want you to give us a bottom line, just straight, no chaser. How would you characterize the state of Black men and boys in 2021?
Well, one, thank you for having me. I appreciate you, brothers, taking the time to, be on, and I'm glad to be here with many of you. A lot of brothers who I look up to. Shout out to my dear brother, Tony Lewis Jr., man. The work that you're doing is absolutely phenomenal. Free Tony Lewis. Got to make sure I say that. Also, Brother Crawford, man, who I've known for a very long time. I work with 100 Black Men, and also everybody's OG, Reverend Tony Lee. But to get to your point, what's the state of Black men and boys in the year 2021? To some belief, I believe that we're in a much better position in which we've been before, but still a great deal of work to go. When I look at, even for example, the brothers who are on this call, you have now brothers who are moving in a wide variety of different directions, whether that be in the boardrooms, whether that be on the ball court, whether that be in the education field and so forth. There are many of us who are now understanding the depth of what our opportunities are, and we're going for those. I think there's also an awakening of sorts amongst brothers across the country. I also feel as if in many regards that we are much more opportune to work with each other in ways in which may not have transpired before, showing each other love, understanding and becoming more in depth and in tune with our emotions, with how we control ourselves, how we interact with others, how we protect and respect our women. I think there's a higher level of consciousness in which we see now, but that does not take away from the fact that there still is a great deal of work to be done on the ground. There are still many brothers and sisters. I'm in LA right now. There are still many brothers who need a mentor or some help, some assistance in many ways, still trying to understand how to cope. So the job is not done in any way, shape, form, or fashion, but I do think that we're moving forward. And the more in which we continue to move in this direction, the better off we're going to be. I'll just close with saying this. You don't end 400 years of systemic oppression and 400 years of brothers being beaten down and taken advantage by the criminal justice system, by health, by just instances and institutions who have been created to dismantle us. You don't knock that off in just a generation or two. This is a marathon. Everybody likes to quote Nipsey and say the marathon continues. Well, we're running the marathon. So let's continue to run. Let's get in shape and let's help our brothers who aren't there yet get to where they need to be.
Dr. Bellamy, thank you so much. Tony Lewis, holla at me, brother. Like, if you had a magic advocacy wand, a magic wand, and you could wave it to get Americans to fight for Black men in one or two areas, what would you have folks rally around?
Oh man, Red, that's a big one. I mean, I'm gonna speak more from my lens. One of the things that I think would be incredibly helpful for Black men, as we've discussed, sort of the impact of the criminal justice system on Black men, is that if we could have a situation where people's rights could be restored upon release, upon them serving their debt to society, that they could do everything that everybody else can do. And there's no barriers on, particularly around employment and housing and certifications and access to lending or finances. I mean, one of the things that I think went unseen during COVID was that even in some of the the CARES Act money and stuff was still marginalized. People that had criminal history was marginalized around that. I mean, it goes deep and it's pervasive. So I think I would start there. The other thing that I would say will really be something that's really rooted in economics, man, like a real economic plan to empower Black men, right? I think that many of the other issues that we face, whether it's violence, health disparities, being involved in the criminal justice system, so much of it has to do with poverty and the lack of access. So I would really, and that obviously involves education and things of that nature. But those are the two fronts that I think we would serve our communities the best: rights restoration and having Black men to be centered in terms of economic development. And that's not just around employment, right? That is really about entrepreneurship, access to capital and all of those things that will really stabilize our community. And, I think when we look back in other communities, there were, efforts to stabilize the men in those communities from an economic standpoint that has led to sort of a different narrative in those communities. Whereas sort of to Dr. Bellamy's point about, when we start talking about, we didn't just get here or randomly get in these situations. I think we victim blame so much when it comes to us, right? We get held accountable for things that are beyond us. And I'm talking about in terms of the fabric of this country, right? And so we're still fighting against a lot of, obviously white supremacy and neglect and, this country, being able to propel itself or other the rest of its citizenry around us being marginalized. And so I do agree with Doc that we are in a better space than I think people like to allude to. I think we and the more that we can get to a point together in terms of that intergenerational sort of conversation and support, I think when we get there, man, we'll really be turning the corner.
Man, thanks a lot, Tony. Dr. Bellamy, I'm coming back to you, and I'm giving a plug for your book, because I believe I should always. And Tony, I'm coming back to you to plug your book too, man. But Dr. Bellamy, so you're an author as well, and you've got a book called "When White Supremacy Knocks Fight Back: How White People Can Use Their Privilege and How Black People Can Use Their Power." Talk a little bit about that in the framework of this work we're talking about with Black men and boys, and how white people can, and how that connects together.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad that we're going to get a chance to talk about Slug, one of my favorite books out by our dear brother Tony. But white people have an obligation to do what they must in order to fix some of the atrocities that we currently see in our nation. White supremacy runs rampant, literally in a wide variety of areas, arguably in every variety and facet that you can see in the current American system, whether it's the criminal justice system, whether that's in electoral politics, whether that's in education, health disparities, and so forth. So as white people become more educated on how these issues negatively impact people of color, specifically Black folk, because I don't consider myself a person of color. I'm Black. I'm a Black man first before I'm anything else. As white people become knowledgeable and they truly become accountable and just really deal with some of the BS that their ancestors and that many of them currently take advantage and benefit from, then they have an obligation to use that privilege to be able to level, quote unquote, the playing field. When we look at policies and we look at, as Tony was talking about, economics, and like when I was serving as the vice mayor of Charlottesville, Virginia, we were able to bring forth policy initiatives to try to bring forth more resources from an economic perspective to increase the amount of Black businesses that we have. We created this business equity fund that was nearly $250,000 for any Black-owned business at a 1% interest rate, a loan, if you will. And I think, again, like white people have to be advocates for these kind of policy proposals, but also using their privilege to speak up when we see atrocities take place. Now, from a Black person's perspective, we have all the power. I firmly believe that the Creator created us with everything that we need in order to not only do for ourselves, but make sure that we thrive because we are the true ones of this earth. So because of that, Black folk need to understand not only who we are, but who we belong to, the power that we have within us when we work together, and how, even though with everything that's been placed against us in these wide variety of different ways, we still overcome it with policy. We still overcome it with criminal justice reform. We still overcome it with educating our people on the ground. We still thrive. I mean, you think about mothers, and I just finished looking at something specifically pertaining to King Richard, and you see this Black man raising his children in a sport of tennis in a place in which people never thought that they should be, never thought that he would be. You hear all these atrocities and bad stories about Black men not being present in the home. And I mean, this is what we do. We take care of each other. So let's change the narrative. Let's continue to empower ourselves. And within the book, you hear about specific steps and tangible examples about how we do so, not only on a local level with policy change and implementation, but on a national level about how we work together to truly bring forth the tangible change, not the rhetoric about like these pie in the sky ideas, like everybody's going to do X, Y, and Z. We're going to lock arms and sing Kumbaya. I'm talking about specific, tangible things that we can do to bring forth the tangible change that we need in our communities.
Now, Doc, what's the name of the book again, and where can folks go get it right now?
Sure, you can go get it. It's called When White Supremacy Knocks Fight Back, How White People Use Their Privilege, How Black People Use Their Power. It's available on Amazon, and we appreciate everybody's support.
Y'all go get it right now. It'll bless you. It'll bless you. Dr. I'm Brother Dwayne Crawford. So Dr. Bellamy talked about white privilege and white folks utilizing their privilege to be helpful. It's incredible to me, your work with Noble, which is an organization of Black law enforcement, because if there's ever a bastion of white privilege, it's law enforcement, right? So you were in the heart of, like, it don't get more white privilege than law enforcement, right? But you all have the audacity in a space like that to do exactly what Dr. Bellamy is talking about and utilize your power. Talk a little bit about what that looks like to be in that kind of space and be an advocate for our people.
Yeah, absolutely. Bring greetings on behalf of our national president, Frederick Thomas, who is out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. But if he was sitting here having this conversation, you're absolutely correct. Not that we can solve, Noble, everything that's going on in law enforcement, but our members represent some pretty interesting, powerful people. Over half the major cities in this country are led by Noble members. Let me first say this: we are primarily an African-American organization, but not all of our members are African-American. And we have police chiefs and sheriffs and others that are white. But yes, both in the numbers of cities we manage from a law enforcement standpoint and the amount of counties that sheriffs lead. Let me just talk about sheriffs, for example. A police chief is hired, appointed by a city council, a mayor, a city manager. A sheriff is elected. The reason I'm bringing this up, we're starting to see more and more people that look like us who are being elected as sheriffs. Approximately 40% of the largest counties in America now have Noble sheriffs. If you go down to Georgia, for example, almost every major county has got a Black sheriff. Gwinnett County, Cobb County, DeKalb County, Fulton County, you name it. The reason why I bring up the sheriff part is what's starting to happen is our citizens are beginning to do what? Realize that yes, a police chief has some power. Remember something, when a sheriff is running a county, he or she is running the entire county from a law enforcement standpoint. And they're what? Municipal cities and towns in that county. But yes, we at Noble are doing our best to leverage that influence at a federal, state, local, and in some cases, international level. Let me say this. I'm not suggesting that because you have a Noble chief or a Noble sheriff, everything's going to go the way you want it. The real battle for us is the issue of white privilege and the culture of policing. And believe it or not, that ain't as simple as white chief is bad, Black chief is good. It ain't as simple as that. It's the culture of the agency and making sure those that are elected, the mayor, the city council, those persons are being held accountable by the public to ensure the kind of reform that you want. Last I'll say about this, we are spending a lot of our resources and time and trying to empower local communities to get the kind of change they want, or say another term, to reimagine how they want to be policed or the public safety environment they want to live in. I feel very confident. I know we lost the battle for the George Floyd Discipline Policing Act at the federal level. I get that. The battle now is the state and local level. And believe it or not, the bar is very low. citizens can get the change they want at a local level. And I'll strip it on down. Taking components of the George Floyd bill or President Obama's task force report and saying, what do you want locally? Now, I'm not saying it's easy. What I am saying is the glass is half full. And whatever we at Noble can do, whatever our chiefs can do, whatever our sheriffs can do, whatever our fellow officials can do, we don't mind taking those calls. But I don't want to have this gloom and doom conversation. You as a citizen have every God-given and constitutional right to demand the change you want to see locally.
Now, I'm going to come back to you because I'm going to want you to give us about three, when we come back around, around 2 or 3 real practical local things that folks can dig into. And because I need us to hear about that more. Tony, so as we're talking about policing, that you have a book out that's called Slug, A Boy's Life in the Age of Mass Incarceration. And while you're Tony Lewis, that you are Tony Lewis Jr. And we thank God for, even behind you, we see the Free Tony Lewis signs. If you can talk to us a bit about the impact of mass incarceration on Black families, but also some of your own story, because I believe it's important for folks to be able to connect to the person's own story, to be able to see that the kind of work you're doing, anyone can be able to do, to be able to turn literally their pain into power.
Yeah, I appreciate that question too, Ray. But I would say that mass incarceration has been the greatest destabilizer in the Black community. And to use my life as an example, just saying my father went to prison, I was 9 years old. And subsequently he would receive a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. And in that moment, my mom pretty much, lost her sanity, if you will, started to really battle severe mental health issues. And continues to 32 years later. My father continues to be in prison 32 years later. And I'm now a father, well, my husband and my father of an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. And now they have to experience their grandparents in that same state, right? So going to visit my dad in federal prison and trying to manage a relationship with my mother that when she can be incredibly unpredictable, right? And so I'm talking about that multi-generational trauma, that something that started April 15th, 1989 has now impacted my babies in 2021. Not to mention all of the other things that I had to go through growing up in the community where incarceration was so normalized, and watching my friends, because of the instability, because of poverty, because of addiction and things like that, find themselves engaged in the criminal justice system very early, finding themselves succumbing to premature death due to gun violence and overdose and suicide. And I think if we look back, so much of the outcomes, the negative outcomes in a community like mine, which I think is a microcosm of Black communities all over the country, particularly in urban centers, mass incarceration is there. And not to, one of the other things I think that people sort of, when they don't connect the dots and they try to describe this issue as like some island and it's just about those that are incarcerated, which we know is about 2.3 million people incarcerated, but you have about 10 million American children that have had at some point an incarcerated parent. You think about how it marginalizes earning potential. I spoke to rights restoration in the previous question, but even in a lot of states where returning citizens can't vote, right? So the impact of that on the Black community and what Black communities get, in so many places, I'm happy to say here in the District of Columbia, we've always been able to vote. Returning citizens have always been able to vote, but we were also able to lobby, and some of my activism helped in pushing through the Restore the Vote Act. So our DC residents that are currently incarcerated in the Federal Bureau of Prisons participated in the 2020 election. So now our residents that are incarcerated can vote. And I think that's key in terms of leveraging what our communities need, that no citizen, and that's how we like to really refer to people, no citizen will be, their right to vote will be taken away. But that thing of mass incarceration across this country has truly marginalized the Black community. And I don't like to speak about us in a monolith, like every Black family has somebody incarcerated and every Black community is dealing with this. but it is incredibly significant, again, in the communities like the one that I come from. So I'm speaking from that place. And I think that, it in terms of our education system, everything where we are, if you have a family member that is incarcerated, you're impacted by that. So the range of impact from that issue is incredible.
Now, Tony, I want to come right back to you because in that you talk kind of about the story, your narrative, you talked about kind of the impact it's been having on us as a people. I want you to talk a little bit about the kind of activism work you're doing on the ground. One of the things that's so impressive about you is that you're not just in the suites, you're on the streets. And that you are really having and your activism ranges. So it ranges from, I mean, on any given day that you can be in the White House, but you can also be wherever it is in DC navigating things. You can be with top rappers, go-go community, as well as business people and all that kind of stuff. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how you've been shaping your activism? Because I really want folks who are listening to be able to see that there can be a lane for them in different ways. It doesn't just matter, like everybody doesn't have to fit in one lane in activism, but you can have an impact in different spaces, and there are different spaces that people can be able to have impact.
Yeah, so for me, starting out, one is like, dealing in violence interruption, and sort of on in the community style, like, mediating disputes and saving lives, but growing that to be able to impact legislation that will be created specifically to impact that issue, right, of community violence, being able to help men and women when they return from incarceration, being able to connect, be a bridge between that population and the business community so that people can have a seamless transition into employment and entrepreneurship opportunities. But even with that, taking that experience to be able to help come up with a legislation and policy that would make, that would have funding for more support for returning citizens, being able to speak to gentrification or against gentrification, to influence lawmakers around policies and initiatives that would be needed to center Black people in this city around, sustainable housing, affordable housing, and then being able to leverage my relationships with those that have a bigger platform than I, those that in the arts, if you will, those in entertainment, to encourage them to use their voice and become a part of, some of the work that I've been able to do. And then also advocating for children with incarcerated parents, right? Here on a local level, and also being a part of an organization called We Got Us Now as an actionist to lobby and advocate for children with incarcerated parents all across this country. But what I realized, Rev, is it, though my activism has been sort of multifaceted, it's really about the same people, right? And even if I'm speaking for people here in DC or in the DMV, I'm also speaking for our brothers and sisters all across the country. And I think it's important to have range. And lastly, I would also say that, I've really been influenced by, directly and indirectly, by so many, including yourself, including Doc, and not being, being able to watch what other brothers are doing, right? And now, just learning the last 2 days I've been on here with Mr. Crawford and picking up things from him. And for any young person out there that think about getting into activism, and I know it's become a bit more, trendier, and, than what it used to be. And I think that's great. But understand there's real work that needs to be put in and real relationships that need to be built. And you is important, and incumbent upon each individual to grow from and learn from from other people. And for what we here for, I remember, Rev, you called me up and said, Tone, can you come down to Capitol? I've been in Washington, D.C. all my life. And at that point, I guess that was about 5-6 years ago when we went on the Hill. And that was my first time going in the Capitol. Some people may find that to be unbelievable. And I've been there many times after that. But that was going with you and Dan. That was the first time that I had the opportunity to do that. So I think it's important to be open to learning and growing, no matter where you see yourself in this process, and that you can, make change, right? It is possible, but we can't do it alone.
Now, I need y'all to put a pin in that. I need somebody to lock that in. I'm coming right to you. I just wanted to be able to acknowledge that when he said he went to the Capitol, it was on Black Men and Boys Hill Day 5-something years ago. And this is a virtual joint. And so I just wanted to be able to put that right there. Dr. Bellamy, you had something you wanted to share?
Yeah, I think there's something profound that I don't want us to lose what Brother Tony is describing. There is a specific way in which he's just talking about, one, not being afraid of our people, which is of the utmost importance. Because when we're not afraid of our people, we're willing to, one, love our people, we're willing to operate and help them get to where they need to be, but most importantly, show grace to our people when they don't do exactly what we want them to do, when we feel like they should be doing it. That's a rare thing. And I think that the next step for us and the next challenge for many of us brothers who may be in that light and kind of in that field is to be willing to bring more brothers along and teach them and educate them on, again, how to be patient with our own, how to show grace with our own, and not be afraid of our own. Because honestly, no policy is being moved without people in the street.
Right.
Especially when it comes to our people. I mean, I know when I was on city council and serving as vice, like I wasn't getting no policy passed without me bringing 30, 40 brothers and sisters from the street to the city council meeting and letting my colleagues know, yo, y'all don't vote with this if you want, but all of them gonna tear this stuff up if you don't get with it. And I think, again, like, we have to be committed to going into our communities. And as Tony just alluded to, doing the hard work, the stuff that's not on Instagram, the stuff that's not glamorized, that's sitting down with your brother and helping them fill out that job application. That's sitting down with your brother and talking to them about the decision that they need to make. That may be sitting down with your brother and helping them get substance abuse help. That may be sitting down with your brother talking about the children that he may have fathered and how he needs to be able to do better, but that's an economic issue, so we need to try to figure that out. Like, those things take time. Those things aren't trendy, but those are the things that move our community forward. And I hope that, again, we can recommit ourselves if we want to see policy change, which is for some of us to do. In order for that to happen, we got to be able to tap into the streets. We have to be able to get back to our people and talk to them about why these things are important. And I really believe that starts with us not being afraid of each other.
Now, Dr. Bellamy,
I got to say something real quick.
But I want to push back to him just real quick, and I'm coming right to you, Dwayne.
Yeah.
Dr. Bellamy, something you said was that we can't be afraid of us, right?
Right.
Now, my question for you is that also goes for us, not just with the streets, but each other as activists, right? That sometimes, and we're going to have a real conversation, right? And we're going to have a real conversation. Some of the challenges at times and in spaces is that because of the kind of exceptional Negro kind of a thing, that we can be pitted against each other. And everyone's trying to get, whether it's the mic or whether it's the platform or whatever. And there are ways, I believe, in which we need to be collaborative with each other and growing. And I think something that Tony said that was brilliant was he's learned from each of us. He said that he's watched your stuff, he's watched my stuff, that just being here with Dr. Crawford, he's watched his stuff. Dr. Bellamy, talk a little bit also about collaboration among brothers and how we can kind of further help that grow and develop.
Well, it's understanding that this system has been created for us to be pit against each other. Like these echo chambers, these just kind of the way in which society is created and constructed is for us to believe that there can only be one. And that's honestly a byproduct of white supremacy. The exceptional Negro syndrome that you just alluded to, Rev, that's a byproduct of white supremacy. There's not only one person who can do X, Y, and Z. And furthermore, there's no need for us to be jealous of another person who's doing something to help our community. Like I'm fanning out a little bit, if you will, and I don't mind saying that by being on here with Tony. And even though I may have my own following or whatever, like I've watched this brother for probably 5, 6, 7 years on Instagram and so forth, and just love this movement and love the work in which he's doing. That's not for me to be intimidated by. That's not for me to say, yo, like I need to be with where he is. But again, this comes with us understanding as Black men, and I'm just gonna talk about Black men because that's what we're talking about. One, learning to be comfortable with ourselves, because when you're comfortable with yourself and who you are, you're not gonna be one to hate on another brother. But secondly, also understanding that this circle and this tent in the movement to help Black folk and Black liberation is so wide, and there's such a need for all of us to do something that you just need to do your part. And when it's meant to be for us to link up, it's meant for you the moment, you're going to have your moment. God is going to give you what you're supposed to get when you're supposed to get it, but only if you do what you're supposed to do. So I firmly believe that the more, again, that we teach our brothers to love themselves first and understand that you have to be comfortable in your own skin and understand your purpose and your value first, then we can help them understand the power of collaboration. And again, if somebody else's light is to be bright, as the star, you know, I look at our sister like Tamika Mallory, and you know, sis is killing it, right? That's not for us to be jealous over. Our job and our obligation is one is to protect her.
That's
Our
right.
job and obligation is to make sure that she always feels secure. And I'll be candid. My job isn't always to agree with everything that she does,
Mhm.
but I got her back. I
Right.
don't gotta agree with you to have your back and love you. And that's what our obligation is. And the more that we, you know, this is a learned behavior. The more in which we talk about these things, we educate ourselves, but getting back in the trenches and getting back in the streets to teach our brothers these things, the better off we'll be. And we're doing it. Like we do get along. But the majority of us, in my opinion, we do get along.
We really do.
We done been at 20 different things together. And this summer, we really was locked in. We was locked up. Like, you know, we do get along. Like brothers and sisters do get along. Let's get that going.
The brother Crawford, and I know you had something you wanted to share.
I just want to say to the listening and viewing audience, please listen what Mr. Lewis, Dr. Bellamy, and Reverend Lee are saying. We're brothers, period. I'm from I call home North Philly, you know, and we all have similar stories. My grandmother, 16 kids, she buried 12 of them. Almost every male in my family did time. I don't mean no short time. But at the end of the day, we're brothers, and I have a vested interest in my brother to my left and my brother to the right. A vested interest in his success as well as our sisters. I want to say to our viewing, listening audience, this is some real talk, folks. Look, I'm 56. How many more years I got left? But you know what? I got to serve. You guys, I'm going to say something you guys have probably heard from one of our mentors. Either you're going to be a workhorse or a show horse. So either you're going to be a workhorse, I know what I'm talking about. Either you're going to be a workhorse or a show horse. I stole that from a guy named Thomas W. Dorks Jr. But the reason I say that is the work is plenty, but the labor is a few. And I always tell people, I ain't asking you to be on TV. I just need you to serve where you can. And when that call comes to you to help somebody, please help them. But this issue of serving is real. And I tell people all the time, too much is given, much is required. And I try to live my life based on that. It ain't about money, folks. It's about how do we serve our communities. Whether you define it as Black community or African-American community, whatever you want to call it, our communities have the necessary talent. But sometimes, to your point, we got to humble ourselves. Ain't about Dwayne Crawford. It's like when I'm gone and dead and buried, what legacy did I live? Did I really do my best to serve?
Tony, and thank you, Dr. Crawford. I keep calling you doctor. I'd have made you a whole doctor. Thank you.
I'll take what I can get.
Tony, there was something. The Dr. Bellamy, he is a doctor. He had a PhD. He got all them letters there, and he done earned every single one of them. There's something that Dr. Bellamy said, and he talked about Tamika. And he talked about how we also have to catch our sisters' backs. And it made me think, because I remember when the NRA was doing some real shady stuff with Tamika. And I remember that there have been several times when Tamika has called me, called you, and she'd have folks down here, and she knew that, you know, we were going to have our teams out, whatever. Talk a little bit about how brothers are in collaboration and working together with our sisters, especially think about the Black Women's Roundtable. Dr. Bellamy, that you were getting locked up. We were out there with the Black Women's Roundtable and allies, and talk a little bit about what it means and how we have to be beside our sisters in this movement.
Yeah, man. I think, first of all, it's imperative, and we do it. For all the real men, if you're a real man, that's what you're going to do, right? We're going to protect our sisters. We're going to stand beside them, and we don't have no problem with them leading us, right? If that's what's necessary. But we going to be there, Tamika, Miss Melanie, whomever, right? We always showing up, and they can always call on us whenever, and I think that there is a narrative in our community that we don't protect our sisters. And, I think, I had a conversation one time, and I'm not getting off topic, but I got to go here, right? Because I had a conversation about, especially online, this movement about protect Black women, right? And, I remember asking somebody, how many people, in prison about that? like we come up in a situation, sometimes the details don't come out, but real men ain't just letting nothing happen to our sisters, not our mothers, our women, our, and for the guys that step outside those lines, right? In these unfortunate times, men not applauding that behavior. So I think for like men like us, it's always important to model that behavior. So when Tamika called one of us, we coming. You know what I mean? Tanya called us or Melanie called, we coming, because that's what we supposed to do, right? They are sacred. They are the mothers of civilization. We must treat them that way at all times. And not to mention, right, just I think one of the things that's off the table sometimes too, is like, the patriotism that the Black woman has shown as it relates to this country, right? Whether it's those that have served in law enforcement, served in the military, but more importantly, served in our families and our communities, and had the deposits that Black women have made to America, right? Like, honestly. So they are to be revered at all times, protected at all times, and we at their beck and call whenever they need us. I know I am, and I know you guys are, for real. And for the brothers behind us, I think that's when they see us, I know that that's what they see. That's the impression that we leave on them.
Now, folks who are watching, Tony, thank you so much. For folks who are watching, I need you all to be clear. The Black Women's Roundtable, there's an opportunity for you to help support our sisters and be allies with our sisters next Wednesday. Next Wednesday, Black Women's Roundtable and allies will be down at first at the National Council of Negro Women on Pennsylvania Avenue, and then they'll be doing a walk from there to the Supreme Court, and they'll be doing a speak out there. And I know they'll put the link in the chat. They'll put the link in the chat right now for that activism. But we need to be there with our sisters. I'm saying all brothers who are watching, Wednesday, it's all kinds of stuff that you can help do on this Wednesday, as in Wednesday of next week, that we want to see your face in the place. We want to see you there. We'll be blessed to see you there. And honored. Now, I want to pivot just real quickly because I got a little bit of time and a couple of things I want to make sure I get to. Dr. Bellamy, so you done had about 15,000 jobs, right? About 15,000 jobs. And you ain't that old, dude. I'm 53. I looked at all the jobs you had, and I'm like, okay, now I done worked at Sizzler Steakhouse. I done worked at G.C. Murphy's, right? He'd have been an author. He'd have been a chair of a department, but he also been the vice mayor of Charlottesville, Virginia, right? I mean, so he done had some real jobs, you know what I'm saying? I mean, he done had some real joints. I want you to talk a little bit because in Charlottesville, one of the things that was in the news recently was this $25 million judgment that happened in there. And I just want to kind of get your thoughts as someone who is the vice mayor of Charlottesville about that judgment, about what's happened in Charlottesville and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I was the only Black person on the city council at that time, and I'm the one that essentially said we're going to remove these Confederate statues. So a lot of that vitriol from Richard Spencer and Jason Kessler and others, as many have seen in the court cases, that was kind of directed at me. They wanted to, quote unquote, put me in a place, if you will. But I think it just goes to show when you see a judgment like $25 million being handed down, one, they won't be able to pay that. They'll be bankrupt and they'll be paying that for the rest of their lives. But secondly, it sends a very strong message to individuals who are of that ideology that you will be dealt with and handled accordingly, not only in the court systems, but also on the streets. So, we're not, our community as a whole in Charlottesville, we're not standing idle and just allowing individuals to just come in our community and run rampant with their racist ideology and that thought. But furthermore, we will take you individuals to court and there will be judgments handed out. I think that was a step in the right direction for our nation. However, there's still so many more atrocities that have to be addressed that are on the underlying surface. So when you look at something overt, like thousands of Nazis and white supremacists coming to a city and saying all of these racist and vile things, that's very much blatant and in your face. That needs to be dealt with. And, again, the judgment was provided to the individuals who proceeded in that regards. That's great. But then I think we have to also pivot to the policies. And while these may not be covert, so in your face, when we see something like, again, that's happening with Tony Lewis Sr., or we see like even your homeboy who you know up the street, who has been convicted in his first offense and thrown, 20 years for an offense that we saw someone who doesn't look like him get a slap on the wrist for. Those things have to be addressed. When we look at our school systems, the more overt practices, or excuse me, covert practices, such as individuals not being allowed to be in gifted and talented classes, when we know that these Black boys and girls should be, and we see mediocrity come forth with white parents, or excuse me, with white students, and they're placing these trajectories that allow them to go on to greater heights. These things happen all of the time. When we look at the just the so few Black men, if we're talking about Black men and boys who are in the education system who are teaching, Black men represent 2% of the total teaching population. You know, the lack of brothers who we have in this pipeline in that regard to help teach our babies. So all of these things have to be addressed. So yeah, you know, again, I'm very proud of the settlement and the judgment by the judge, but I'm even more proud that we're addressing some of these other issues that aren't as sexy and talked about on the surface level, and more importantly, in the streets.
Wonderful. Now I'm coming to Dwayne, and then I'm coming to all of you all, but this is the lightning round. I need you to answer this in like 1.5, 2 minutes, because our time is almost up. What I want you to be able to hit me with is kind of closing remarks, but closing remarks about 1 or 2 things that people can do where they are. 1 or 2 things. And Brother Dwayne, you were talking about kind of some things people can do on the ground. And then when you finish telling folks what they can do, I want you to tell folks how they can follow you, whether it's on social media or web or whatever. But I want to make sure the folks know how to follow you.
Absolutely. So I encourage everyone, however you as an individual citizen, imagine or reimagine how you want to be served and protected by your local public safety or your police department. Now, there are 3 things I tell people to take into that battle, that conversation. One, believe it or not, is still President Obama's 21st century task force report. Take the executive summary, just take that summary and read it. Number 2, the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution. All it says is you're due equal protection and equal justice under the law. Now, do I think that actually happens? No. But the reason I bring this up is a very basic question to that chief or that sheriff or that mayor. Do you feel equally protected, and do you think you're receiving equal justice? And the last thing is the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Now, those 3 bits of information are used to do the following thing: to hold your public safety or your police department, your sheriff's office accountable. They say, are they implementing these things? And if they're not, why? Number 2, your elected official, your mayor, your city council, your county commissioner, the same thing now. We put you in office, we can remove you from office. Are you making sure our public safety departments are doing what? Implementing these policies to protect our community. And then the last thing I'll just say on this is I'm not saying you have to do this. Consider, do you want to actually join and work for agencies? This is why I bring this up. Right now, there is a huge flight of officers who are leaving the profession. And I get why you may not want to be a police officer. But I would say this: if you want to change the system, consider joining the system. And these are very lucrative jobs, by the way. The average salary is $50,000 to $60,000 starting salary with a high school diploma, with a pension and full benefits. Now, I'm not here to say you got to go do this job. What I am here to say, and we're actually launching an HBCU initiative to go out and talk to our young people about joining this profession. One, because they need to see people that look like us serving and protecting our communities. Now, I get why you may not want to do it, but I would ask you to consider doing it.
Tell folks how they can follow you.
Yeah. So so on Twitter, it's Noble NATL is our Twitter handle. Noble NATL. Also, we're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, and we're also on Instagram. But if you put in Noble NATL, that's the most consistent handle we have. We're on all social platforms. I'm also going to do this. Phone number. Anyone can use this number. That's my personal number, 404-849-8966. 404-849-8966. Now, because I'm giving this number, anyone can call me, and everybody does. If you got an issue, you got a concern, you got a question about anything I've talked about, please feel free to call me 7 days a week.
Now, y'all done just got the hookup right here. I'm saying this is how we do it. The daggone executive director of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement just gave you a cell. What the world? Man, oh man, I tell you, it's a bad thing. Tony Lewis, hit me up.
Yes, sir. So real quick, first of all, you can on all platforms, Mr. Tony Lewis Jr., MR, Tony Lewis JR, TonyLewisJr.com, FreeTonyLewis.com. And the two things that I would say that I would want to leave people with. One, Wes said something incredible, right, about not being scared of your people, right? So serve where you are. That's the thing I want to say. This is how I started. Everybody want to shoot at the world, right? But start where you are. Help somebody in your orbit, in your vicinity, that you know that is in need. That could be something as simple as tutoring a kid or being a plug for somebody to get a job or just cleaning up around your way. But start where you are. And then the second thing that I would say is vote. Like, honestly, become politically active, right? Attend your civic association meetings, your community meetings, let your voice be heard. And I think it's great even when you haven't been active in that space because your voice is needed. Wes talked about who he was on that council, and even if you don't ascend to that role, but just being activating your civic energy, I think is important because our voices need to be heard in all of our communities. And thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been a real honor and a pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thanks, bro. Dr. Bellamy.
I can't really add much more than what the brothers have already said. I can't add much more to it. I think as Tony just alluded to, man, serving your community. If I could echo that 20,000 times, I would. You don't need to, it's not everybody's job or responsibility to lead a 20,000 person march. Sometimes the work in which we need not only get started where you are, but it's most needed where you are. And you can be the most impactful there. So please start there, man. You can find me on all social media platforms at Dr. Wes Bellamy. Also, please be sure to follow at Our Black Party. Also follow at 100 Black Men of America. We're trying to be in the streets, trying to be on the ground. And, I'm here to help however I can, whenever I can. And please support these brothers as we all continue to do the work. And if I could just leave with anything, man, just please be patient with people, be impatient with progress. We are moving in the right direction. Let's not allow anybody to tell us that we aren't. But this is a marathon. So get in shape and let's keep running.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you all so much. This has been an incredible conversation. And one of the things that I believe is important for everybody to leave with, and one of the things that I heard from you all, and just in knowing you all and watching your work from afar and up close, is you're all servant leaders. And that's why service was so strong for you all, that your leadership comes out of your service. And so I would encourage anyone who's watching to really hear that thread that these brothers talked about of service to community, of service to your people, servant leadership. That it's not always about the platform. It's not always about being the one on the mic. It's not always about having to be the one in front. If you'll serve, then God can use you in all kinds of ways, but service is the heart of it all. If you'll serve the people, then our communities can be better. I have been blessed to be in this, and y'all can get me Rev Tony Lee at Rev Tony Lee everywhere, at Rev Tony Lee. Look, it's been a blessed conversation. Wes Bellamy, PhD, Tony Lewis Jr., Dwayne A. Crawford. Brothers, thank y'all so much. We salute you. We appreciate you. God bless y'all, and y'all have a wonderful night. I'm tossing it back to Josh, and I'm on time.
Well, look at that. Finally, I know sometimes you have, some issues. Your punctuality.
Watch yourself. I still got a hot mic, Josh. Watch yourself.
I'm trying to, as we're closing out, to try to get my jab here. You're right. Thank you for making sure it's both of us here so I can talk my smack while seeing him. I got to be careful. They said the fly is passed out in the DMV. They say that, but I don't know that. I got some stories about him to tell you. But while you're here, I want to say thank you. I think our team thanks you, Reverend Lee, for the work you do, your commitment, not only just as a board member, but then just a servant leader within this progress here with NCBCP. You then being a convener and being the chair and of really this process of us at BMI, kind of been your baby, as you like to say. And so thank you for sharing that with us and leading us. And then I also like to thank Daryl Coles. The one thing this young man And Rev Lee and I can talk about this because he was just a participant in 2016, 5 years ago. So you, for those who are participating in this, our planning committee, you've often seen Daryl calling you, emailing you, writing those emails. I think he is really, outside of Rev Lee, the reason why we're seeing this and this happening in the birth of really the recreation of this. And so I want to thank him. But also more
Oh,
importantly,
praise the, I'm sorry, Josh. I just want, it's all credit to you, gentlemen. Thank y'all for being excellent role models, just seeing the work you've been doing over the years in person, just how you move and everything. So I always try to take back things I hear you gentlemen talk about, definitely back to the community. And as Dr. West, Mr. Tony, and everybody has said, just keep moving, it's a marathon. So always definitely just appreciate you, brothers. That's all I can really say, truly.
Rev, he's a true activist when he has his background is a photo of himself on a billboard. So
you're rocking and rolling.
You're right, dude.
My
They're
God.
rocking and rolling. So we appreciate you. Also want to just give a quick shout out to those who participate in planning, from Brandon Cahey from NEA, obviously Dwayne Crawford from working overtime for doing 2 panels, and Vincent for stepping in for his work and the work he continues to do at the Unity Coalition in Louisiana. Wes for always just showing up, or this last minute, about always understanding the importance of showing up for us. Tony Lewis Jr., who's here, say whatever you need me to do. And for the panelists from yesterday as well. And so Des and me, who's a part of the family, Diallo, Hassan, for all this making happen. And more importantly, Melanie Campbell, Tanya Tyson, but Melanie always saying, Josh, you need to do this. You need to figure it out. Y'all, I'm leaving it to you brothers to figure it out. So, but still, with her guidance and making some changes and helping that vision. And lastly, I want to also thank our sponsors who understood the importance of this, understand the importance that in this moment. And so Neo Philanthropy was one of our funders for this, as well as SCIU and Verizon and Coca-Cola. So really appreciate those. And so thank you again. And you guys have a great evening.
Bless you, Josh. We appreciate you, man.
Take care.
Great job,
everyone.
brother. Everybody take care. Have a blessed one.